$400 million. Read that number again slowly, because the music industry spent half a century making sure no rapper would ever get near it. In early 2022, the news detonated across hip-hop. Drake had signed a LeBron-sized deal with Universal Music Group, worth an estimated $400 million. Not an athlete. Not a tech founder. A rapper from Toronto who once played a teenager on a Canadian teen drama. The announcement didn't just make headlines, it rattled the foundation of the rap business, because nothing even close to this had ever happened in the history of the genre. And here is the explosive truth almost nobody in the media bothered to ask. What did that $400 million actually buy? Who really owns what? And how long did it take Drake to hand the label its money back? The answer will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the music business, because what Drake has done in the 4 years since signing that paper borders on financial warfare. And the craziest part? He told us the entire plan, line by line, hidden inside the music. So stay locked in, because by the end of this breakdown, you'll understand why Universal might be panicking behind closed doors, why Drake is suddenly rapping about freedom like a man counting down the days on a calendar, and why the month of May 2026 could become the most dangerous month the record industry has faced in decades. Let's start with what we actually know about the deal itself, because the details have been guarded like state secrets. Not much has ever been made public about the structure of this monster contract, but through digging, 2 crucial facts emerge, and they change everything. Fact number 1, Universal gets a piece of everything Drake creates during the contract term. Streaming revenue, touring income, merchandise, production deals. If Drake's name is attached and money moves, UMG collects its cut. This is what the business calls a 360 arrangement, except scaled up to a level the business has never seen, a power 360 built for the biggest artist on the planet. Fact number 2, and this is the one that matters more than the money, Drake owns the master recordings of the music generated under this deal. Understand what that means. The label distributes, the label promotes, the label collects its percentage, but the actual recordings, the assets that print revenue forever, belong to Aubrey Graham. The lion's share of the long-term money flows back to him. In the old industry, labels fought to the death to own masters, because masters are the oil wells of music. Drake walked into the most expensive negotiation in rap history and kept the oil wells. So once you clear those 2 facts off the table, one massive question remains standing in the middle of the room. What does it actually mean for an artist to receive $400 million from a record company, and how fast did Drake make that money back? Here's the uncomfortable reality most fans never consider. A $400 million payout from a record label is essentially a glorified loan. It is not a gift. It is not a lifetime achievement reward. It is an advance. The largest advance in music history, with one brutal requirement stapled to it. The artist must generate enough revenue to recoup the money before he truly profits. The label is not a charity. The label is a bank with a marketing department. What remains unclear in Drake's specific contract is how many albums he owes and how many years the term runs. But basic record label logic cuts through the mystery like a knife. Just make our money back. Everything else is noise. And this is where the story gets fascinating, because if you listen closely to the music Drake has released since 2022, really listen, the way we're about to listen, you can hear a man's entire relationship with money, power, and the industry transform in real time. Something changed in Drake the moment that signature dried. The confidence changed. The subject matter changed. The willingness to aim directly at the people cutting his checks changed. The music tells the story. And the story starts, out of nowhere, on a Friday in June. A few months after the deal was announced, with zero warning, Drake dropped Honestly, Nevermind in June of 2022. The album debuted with 204,000 first-week units. Now, throughout this breakdown, we're going to be translating streaming numbers into estimated revenue, and I want to be completely transparent with you about the methodology. The only truly accurate streaming data available to the public comes from Spotify. Every other platform keeps its numbers locked in a vault. So using a conservative estimate of 100 to 167 streams for every dollar generated, honestly, Nevermind likely produced somewhere between $1.5 and $2.5 million in gross streaming revenue during its opening week alone. And since then, the album has stacked roughly 3.16 billion streams on Spotify by itself. Run that same formula across those billions, and the project may have generated somewhere between $19 and $31 million in gross Spotify revenue to this day. But here is what makes, honestly, Nevermind genuinely fascinating beyond the numbers. The second Drake secures $400 million, he takes the single biggest artistic risk of his entire career. A house-influenced dance album from the biggest rapper alive at the exact moment his label needed safe, reliable, recoupable hits. That is not a coincidence. That is a man who suddenly feels free creatively and financially to gamble. And as we'll see, that freedom only got louder. Because in the fall of 2022, Drake linked up with 21 Savage and released Her Loss, and that is where the quiet confidence turned into open warfare. During its opening week in November 2022, Her Loss pulled in 513 million streams, which translates to an estimated $3.1 to $5.1 million in gross streaming revenue in 7 days. Today, Her Loss sits at roughly 4.26 billion streams on Spotify. Same math, that is anywhere between $25 and $42 million. So zoom out for a second. Two projects, both released in the same calendar year the deal was announced, and Drake is already creeping toward the $100 million mark in generated revenue from streaming alone, before touring, before merch, before anything else. For $100 million borrowed, a quarter of the way back in 12 months. But the money is only half the story of Her Loss. The other half is what Drake says on it, because this is the album where he stops playing nice with the industry and starts aiming at it. Her Loss opens with rich flex, and right away the messaging is loud. The flex alone tells you about Drake's status, but the real headline arrives on major distribution, where Drake steps to the microphone and announces that his label is on him for real. Think about how unusual that is. Rappers brag about cars, jewelry, women, houses. Drake is opening a song by bragging that his record company is desperate to keep him happy. And then he goes further, delivering the line that should be framed in the Museum of Music Business History. Major distribution. Labels call him Bad Bunny numbers. It's a robbery. 500 million just for Aubrey. He is describing his own contract on wax. He is telling you the deal is built around distribution, that Universal's main contractual obligation is to push and promote the music, while the agreement leans heavily in Drake's favor regardless of the enormous sum attached. He is telling you the number was so large it felt criminal. And he's doing it over a beat, smiling, because he knows nobody in the boardroom can respond. Drake has never rapped this much about his record label, or about the machinery of the rap business, period. There's more corporate talk on Back Outside Boys and even sharper jabs on BS, where Drake describes hopping on another artist's track and making the label think they need them being the artists the label actually signed, not Drake. Sit with that for a second. Imagine being one of Drake's collaborators and hearing the biggest artist alive say, on your own song, that his presence is the only reason your label values you. That is not a feature verse. That is a public demonstration of leverage. But as 21 Savage growls on the hook, they're on whatever, meaning the two of them are ready for whatever smoke follows. The album keeps stacking these moments. On privileged rappers, alongside broke boys and rich in millions, Drake elevates his antagonism toward the entire rap industry. He is finally saying the quiet part out loud. There is a canyon between him and the rest of the marketplace, a gap created by the deal he just signed and by a decade of undeniable skill. And then comes Middle of the Ocean, the album's emotional and rhetorical centerpiece, where Drake addresses his finances and his career in the same breath. He reminds you that when he first arrived in America, nobody would check for him, a Canadian kid with a strange name and an acting past. He spits that they said there was no chance the kid would make it here. And that specific phrasing is a surgical strike, because it doubles as a subliminal aimed directly at Joe Budden and Chance the Rapper. There was a period where Budden publicly crowned Chance as the heir to Drake's throne, the man who would take the baton and end the Drake era. Budden himself has since admitted on camera that it was probably his worst take ever, that nobody else said it but him, and that he was doing it just to spite Drake. The no chance line on Middle of the Ocean is Drake reaching back across the years to bury that prediction in front of millions. They underestimated him, he says, misjudged his entire trajectory, and now they have to pay that money directly to him. That is not a rap verse. That is a receipt. Step back and look at what Her Loss really is. A victory lap wrapped in 40 minutes of smoke. It plays like Drake finally leaning back in his chair, surveying the empire and exhaling 4 words, "I did it." And that energy matters because of where he'd come from. Remember, this is the same artist who, one album earlier on Certified Lover Boy, opened with champagne poetry confessing that every single move feels like rolling dice on a board. The same artist who, on the Love All hook, admitted that if it's all going to fall, then it's going to fall on him, a long way down from the heights he was chasing. That was a post-pandemic Drake, an uncertain Drake, a man staring at a changed world and wondering whether the gamble would hold. Now place that next to the man on Her Loss, radiating accomplishment, and the transformation is total. The gambles paid off. The sacrifices paid off. The scrutiny paid off. And now Drake can finally say how he really feels, and how he really feels, aimed at the doubters, is unprintable. On that same record, he tells the industry to treat him like a newborn Lucian, a nod to Lucian Grange, the chairman of Universal Music Group, and swears they aren't dropping him. Then he makes a promise that should have been front-page news. He's been pocket-checking the industry for 5 years, and they're about to kick into high gear. Hold on to that 5-year figure, because it comes back later in this story like a boomerang. 5 years from 2022 is 2027. Was that Drake sketching his long-term release plan inside a verse, or was that the actual contract term limit hiding in plain sight? Keep that question in your pocket. We're coming back to it. With Her Loss closing one chapter, Drake prepared the next, for all the dogs. And first, he did what he always does when a new era begins. He went on the road. On March 13th, 2023, he announced the It's All A Blur tour, with the opening date set for July 5th, 2023. The tour was billed as a celebration of Drake's entire career, a setlist stretching from the very beginning to the present day. When the run finally wrapped, the total came in at a staggering $320 million gross. Now do the math with me, because this is the moment the story snaps into focus. Honestly, Nevermind generated somewhere between 19 and 31 million. Her Loss generated somewhere between 25 and 42 million. The It's All A Blur tour generated 320 million. Added up, and on paper, before splitting the bag with partners, before taxes, before agents and managers take their slices, Drake had already made his label roughly $400 million under the new contract. The loan was repaid. The advance was recouped. Everything from this point forward is profit in the ledger. And Drake was just getting warmed up. Let's take a breath and look at the ledger like accountants, because the pace of this story is about to accelerate and you deserve to see every number standing still for once. Honestly, Nevermind, roughly 3.16 billion Spotify streams, worth an estimated $19 to $31 million. Her Loss, roughly 4.26 billion streams, worth 25 to 42 million. The It's All A Blur tour, 320 million in gross ticket sales, one of the highest grossing hip-hop tours ever staged. For All the Dogs, roughly 4 billion streams, worth 26 to 43.5 million. Some Sexy Songs for You, a #1 debut, 246,000 first-week units, over 1 million sold total, plus a European run that grossed 88 million across 34 dates. The Anita Maxwin Tour, 200,000 tickets, roughly 30 million more. Line them up, add them carefully, and the range lands between $541 and $551 million. Gross. In 4 years. And remember the 2 structural facts we established at the start. Universal takes a cut of everything, but Drake owns the masters of everything made under this deal, which means even the label's share of the pie sits on top of assets that belong to him. Every stream you play of a post-2022 Drake song feeds a machine whose most valuable parts he personally holds. That is the difference between being rich and being dangerous. Rich is having money. Dangerous is owning the thing that makes the money. Then, in October 2023, For All the Dogs arrived. During its opening frame, the album generated 514 million streams, translating to an estimated $3 to $5 million in gross streaming revenue in a single week. Today, the standard edition of For All the Dogs has accumulated approximately 4 billion streams on Spotify, and using our established formula of 100 to 167 streams per dollar. The album may have produced anywhere between $26 and $43.5 million in Spotify streaming revenue to date. Another brick in the wall. Then the timeline jumps forward, past the storm of 2024. We'll get to that storm, because it changed Drake's music more than any contract clause ever could, to February 2025. When Drake and PartyNextDoor finally released their long-awaited collaborative album, Some Sexy Songs for You. The project debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, moving 246,000 album equivalent units in the United States during its opening week, and it has since officially crossed 1 million units sold. But the album was only one component of the financial machine. Drake and PartyNextDoor took the project on the road, and during the tour's initial reported run, they generated $30 million across just 12 dates, immediately stamping it as one of the most commercially successful hip-hop tours ever staged in Europe. And that was merely the opening act. According to officially reported box office data, the complete 34-day European run ultimately grossed $88 million. $88 million. For a collaborative R&B leaning project. In Europe. On top of that, Drake mounted the Anita Max Win Tour in early 2025, his first performances in that region since 2017. And across 12 officially reported shows it sold more than 200,000 tickets and grossed approximately $30 million. So let's put the whole picture on one screen. From music alone for projects, 2 major touring runs, Drake helped generate an estimated $541 to $551 million in gross revenue since signing his deal. Let me say that differently. The label handed Drake $400 million, and in roughly 4 years, Drake handed the label back more than $550 million in gross receipts, with Drake owning the masters on top of it. That is not a partnership. That is one of the greatest business trades in entertainment history. And it brings us, inevitably, to Iceman. But before we tackle Iceman properly, I have to ask you a question, and I want you to actually answer it in the comments, because reasonable people are going to disagree here. Do we think, in the 4 years since signing that deal, Drake blew through the initial $400 million he was given? Forget taxes for a moment. Remember that Drake sees a percentage of the $550 million he's already generated for his label. So the question isn't really whether he spent the advance, it's whether a man spending at Drake's level could burn through that kind of fortune at all. Because let's put this in context. Do you understand how absurd it is for a single human being to have generated more than the negotiated amount of the largest contract in music history inside only 4 years of the term? Most artists never recoup. Most artists spend their entire careers underwater on their advances, chained to albums they owe. Drake recouped the biggest advance ever written before the contract was even halfway old. That is the bargaining power Drake carries into the Iceman era. He doesn't walk into the negotiation as a client. He walks in as the house. And today, we see a Drake whose entire relationship with money, with his label, and with the industry has been permanently rewired. On Make Them Cry, he mentions flat out that he's ready to battle the label, the majors, and the radio stations. Read that again. The label, the majors, and the radio stations, the entire traditional power structure, named in one breath, by the biggest artist in the world. Remember the lesson of major distribution. The label's core contractual duty is distribution. Distribution is the service. But the central tension running through Drake's recent music is the feeling that the institution has turned against him. He refers to the label as they. They have been trying to find his replacement. They have been maneuvering behind his back. They, the pronoun of a man who no longer sees his business partners as partners at all. But my favorite moment, the moment that compresses Drake's entire career into a single verse, arrives on Firm Friends, where Drake raps that he went from mass distribution to leading his own version of the revolution. That private arbitration leads to resolution, and that he beat the game so many times the whole thing has gotten abusive. 4 lines. That's all. And inside those 4 lines is the entire Drake business philosophy, the Drake psychological profile, and the Drake endgame. Let's slow down and take them apart one at a time, because each phrase builds on the last like steps on a staircase. First movement, from mass distribution to leading his own version of the revolution. Mass distribution evokes the old music industry, major labels, radio programmers, retail chains, the entire machinery that used to decide who became a star. Drake is reminding you where he came from, a system built on corporate gatekeeping. But notice the precision of his wording. He does not say the revolution. He says my own version of the revolution. That distinction is everything. Drake is not claiming he will burn the music industry to the ground for everyone. He is saying he rewrote the rules for himself. And look at the evidence. Drake has increasingly become a vertically integrated business. Direct deals, gambling partnerships, Nike, media ventures, OVO Sound, OVO Clothing, selective releases, and the proven ability to move the entire culture without asking a single gatekeeper for permission. His revolution is not ideological. It is personal. It is a revolution of leverage, and leverage in the modern music business is the only currency that never loses value. Second movement. Private arbitration leads to resolution. Watch how abruptly the language shifts from revolutionary imagery straight into legal terminology. Private arbitration is the opposite of a public courtroom. Disputes settled quietly, behind closed doors, with lawyers and contracts instead of headlines and hearings. The implication is that Drake has reached an altitude where his problems are no longer fought in public. People don't battle him on Twitter. They negotiate with him in conference rooms. The public sees the headlines. The real war happens in the rooms nobody is allowed to film. And that fits the persona Drake has been constructing for years, a man who understands that true power isn't loud. True power settles things privately, signs the paper, and lets the world find out later. Third movement. He beat the game so many times the whole thing has gotten abusive. Now the metaphor shifts again. The industry becomes a video game. Most artists spend an entire career trying to beat the game once. Drake believes he has beaten it over and over on every measurable difficulty setting: sales, streams, touring, awards, cultural dominance. And that echoes a theme running through all of his later music. Success no longer provides novelty. Winning has become routine. Winning has become so routine, in fact, that it stopped feeling like triumph and started feeling like friction. Abusive, he says. The game itself is tired of losing to him. Now, Drake's idea of business has changed drastically since 2022, and you cannot separate that change from the fact that he spent 2024 in the middle of hip-hop's civil war, the most public and most damaging battle of his career. And on Make Them Know, he starts doing something no one expected, predicting things. First, he says they'll act like they're signing a deal when they pay him for wasting his time. Decode that. Drake is describing himself sitting in arbitration, believing his label deliberately moved to devalue him while he was in the middle of contract renegotiations. And the speculation around the industry, reported in hushed tones but repeated everywhere, is that Drake's ask this time was $750 million. Nearly double the last number. So when Drake raps on that same record about putting 400 racks on their head, about spending so frivolously, about acting like the money is unlimited, understand what you're hearing. I have listened to rappers flex about wealth my entire life. I have heard decades of verses about spending money and drowning in opulence. But I have never, not once, heard a rapper at this stage of his career openly confess that he is spending carelessly. That is not a flex. That is a man looking at his $400 million reflection and wondering aloud whether he should have been more responsible and whether responsibility is even possible when the money never stops. And I can't shake the feeling that these thoughts only arrive at this particular moment because Drake was looking around, at his friends, at his family, at the wreckage of the 2024 battle, and wondering whether he could dig himself out of the hole that year left behind. Because with being the guy comes a burden nobody warns you about. The money and the stature demand better choices, and Drake starts narrating his purchases on these records not with pride, but with a tinge of shame. The cars, the jewelry, the flights, listed like a confession rather than a celebration. That is a psychological shift worth pausing on. The man who once rapped about money like a scoreboard is now rapping about money like a weight. Drake's changing relationship with money and his label have both been rattled, and the evidence is scattered across the track list like evidence markers at a scene. On Make Them Remember, he calls himself Lucian's golden goose, invoking the universal chairman by name again, and describes shaking things up in Lucian's house. The golden goose. Think about the self-awareness in that image. Drake knows exactly what he is to Universal Music Group, the animal that lays the golden eggs, and he is reminding them what happens in the fable when the owners get greedy with the goose. On Make Them Pay, he demands his freedom outright. And then there's the register he strikes on Janice SD Few, where he croons, not raps, that his label has to free him. When a rapper growls a demand, it's theater. When Drake sings it, Wounded, it's something closer to a hostage letter. The song titles and hooks across this era all point at one ultimate desire, freedom. Freedom from 3 possible directions, and only Drake knows which road he's taking. Option 1. He is satisfied once his current contract is fulfilled, and the date that floated through the industry for years, the date everyone circled in red ink, was May 15th, 2026. The rumored triple release day, meant to close out his obligations in one strike. That date has now come and gone, and the silence from both camps since is deafening. Option 2. Even after satisfying the deal, he refuses to extend with Universal and takes his leverage to the open market, to an Epic Records, to a Sony, to whoever is willing to write the first billion-dollar music contract. Or Option 3, the nuclear option, the one that should terrify every executive in the business. Drake goes fully independent. Stop and actually imagine an independent Drake for a moment. Remember the gross amounts we've already established, nearly $600 million generated from music and touring alone in 4 years. Now imagine Drake not having to split that pie with a label at all. Imagine every streaming dollar, every ticket, every piece of merch flowing directly into an operation he controls completely. Drake is a business, so of course he'd still pay his staff, his collaborators, his family and friends. But imagine him owning the entire machine from top to bottom, masters, distribution, marketing, the works. That is a competitor no record label on earth wants to face in the open market. Because here's the terrifying truth for the industry, Drake doesn't need the machine anymore. The machine needs him. And both sides know it. The ultimate evolution of Drake's financial checkmate arrives on B's on the Table, where he opens by admitting the contract talk is frying his brain and that the numbers being discussed are actually insane. He is communicating on 2 tracks at once, through the title, through the hook, through every bar, confirming everything we've been laying out across this entire breakdown. His value has outgrown the contract that was supposed to define it. And that connects to something Drake said years ago in an interview that now reads like prophecy. They'll tell you you're the man one day, and the next day it's $1 billion and opinions change. You just have to keep working. You can't acknowledge how well it's going, because the moment you do, the standard moves. You have to get better. That's just how the game works. And then he zoomed all the way out past hip-hop, past rap, to the legacy of music itself. Because rap is just a genre, and plenty of artists in other genres have done the same things or more, and if you're really serious about it, you want to be remembered in the legacy of music, period. That is the context for everything happening now. Drake stopped competing with rappers years ago. Drake is competing with history. So where does that leave us? Let's stack the whole case. A $400 million advance, the largest in music history, structured as a glorified loan. Masters retained by the artist. $551 million in gross revenue generated in roughly 4 years from 4 projects and 2 touring runs. A label whose core obligation is distribution, now being described by its own biggest artist as an adversary hunting for his replacement. An arbitration process playing out behind closed doors while the artist confesses on record that the numbers being discussed are frying his brain. A rumored ask of $750 million. A rumored freedom date of May 15, 2026. And a 5-year pocket-checking promise made back in 2022 that points, with eerie precision, at 2027. Which brings us back to the question I planted at the very start. How long did it take Drake to make the label its $400 million back? The answer, by the most conservative math we can build from public data, is somewhere around the end of the It's All A Blur tour. Roughly 2 years. The biggest advance in the history of the music business was recouped before most albums finished their second deluxe reissue. And every dollar generated since has been profit stacked on top of masters that Drake himself owns. The label got its money back. Drake kept the oil wells. And now the only thing left to negotiate is freedom, and freedom, as Drake is learning, is the one thing money can't simply buy. And to fully appreciate the venom in that no chance line, you have to remember how real the doubt once was. When Drake first crossed over from Degrassi, the American rap establishment treated him like a novelty, a Canadian child actor who sang too much and rapped too softly. The gatekeepers did not check for him. Radio did not check for him. The purists wrote entire essays about why he would never last. And years later, even after Drake had conquered the charts a dozen times over, prominent voices were still hunting for his successor. Joe Budden looked the culture in the eye and declared that Chance the Rapper would take the baton from Drake and end the era. Budden has admitted since, on his own platform, laughing at himself, that it was probably his worst take ever, that he was doing it partly to get under Drake's skin, and that the prediction aged like milk. That is the context humming underneath middle of the ocean. When Drake says they underestimated him and now they have to pay him directly, he is not just bragging about money. He is reading a list of every skeptic, every executive, every critic who priced him wrong and attaching an invoice. The $400 million contract is the final entry on that invoice. And notice how Drake carries it, not with the desperate hunger of a man trying to prove he belongs, but with the cold calm of a man doing bookkeeping. That tonal shift from hunger to accounting is the single most important character development in modern hip-hop, and almost nobody is talking about it. Keep watching that shift, because it becomes the engine of everything Drake does next. And if you still think the label isn't nervous, consider the timeline one more time, slowly, the way a lawyer would read it to a jury. In 2022, Universal writes the largest check in music history because the alternative, a free agent Drake, is unthinkable. In 2023, Drake grosses $320 million on the road, celebrating the very catalog that made him indispensable. In 2024, the Civil War arrives, and instead of standing behind their golden goose, the machinery of the industry lets him bleed in public, or worse, as Drake clearly believes, quietly tilts the scales against him while he fights for his commercial life. In 2025, Drake responds the only way he knows how, with volume, with tours, with $88 million across Europe and $30 million more on the other side of the world, stacking receipts like a man building a case file. And in 2026, the year the contract was rumored to expire, the loudest thing in the entire story is the silence. No triumphant renewal press release. No farewell announcement. Just closed doors, private arbitration, and an artist who keeps singing over and over, in every register he has, that somebody has to free him. Contracts don't end quietly when both sides are happy. They end quietly when both sides are loading weapons. And whatever is being loaded right now, behind those doors, will decide the balance of power in music for the next decade, because the next time Drake signs a piece of paper, if he ever signs one again, it won't just be a record deal. It will be a surrender. The only question is whose. But here's the twist that keeps me up at night, and it's the one I want to leave you with. Remember that line from Middle of the Ocean, pocket checking for 5 years, then kicking into high gear? If 2022 was year one, then 2027 is the year Drake himself circled. And if the deal's obligations were truly satisfied around that May 2026 date, then everything Drake released in the run-up to it was not just music. It was inventory being cleared before a launch. It was a man emptying the vault before walking out of the bank. So pay very close attention to every title, every hook, every croon demand for freedom in whatever comes next, because Drake has been telling us his business plans inside his verses for his entire career, and there is no reason to believe he stopped now. Now I want to hear from you, because this is where the debate actually starts. Do you think Drake blew through the 400 million, or is he sitting on a fortune so large that even he got nervous rapping about it? Will he re-sign with Universal for the rumored 750 million, jump to a rival like Sony or Epic, or go fully independent and become the most dangerous free agent in the history of entertainment? And the real question, the one the label executives are definitely asking each other behind those closed doors, when Drake becomes a free agent, is there any company on earth that can actually afford him? Drop your take in the comments, because I read them and the best answers are going to shape where this investigation goes next. Because this story is not over. The arbitration is not over. And whatever did or didn't happen behind closed doors this past May has only deepened the mystery. And if you thought the $400 million deal changed hip-hop forever, wait until you see what Drake does when the contract ends. That's the story we'll be tracking next, the free agency of the biggest artist alive, and the industry-wide war it's about to trigger. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because when that news breaks, you'll want to hear it here first. The loan got repaid. The masters stayed home. And the revolution, his own version of it, is just getting started.